Hello, everybody, and welcome. We have people joining, so we'll be making a start in just a couple of minutes. Okay, it's a couple of minutes past the hour, so we've still got people joining, but we'll make a start now. So hello, everybody. My name's Claire Sexton. I'm Senior Director of Scientific Programs and Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to this guide to AAIC For All. Thank you so much for registering to attend AAIC For All in its inaugural year. And this webinar is to be giving you some background. So first today, I'll be talking you a bit through what AAIC as a whole is, then what AAIC For All will entail. Then we'll be joined by Dr. Rebecca Edelmeyer from the MedSci team, who will be given an overview of the landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia research as a whole, and which will act as a springboard for the content at AAIC For All. And then we'll be joined by Sarah Walter, who will be giving some tips for attending AAIC For All and how to make the most of it. So we have over 100 of you joined online, so welcome to everybody. And to start off today, we'll share this short video so that you can have an insight of what AAIC was like last year for the full conference. So there you go. That was an insight into what AAIC For All looks like, what AAIC looks like as a whole, and gives you a taste of just, that it covers every aspect of dementia science, right from basic science and biomarkers through to drug development, public health, dementia care. We have over 100 different countries represented, and we have every career stage of professionals, right from undergraduate students attending their very first conference, to professors who have been attending for years and for decades. So everybody is together in one place, both researchers and clinicians, sharing their latest findings, really, and sparking new ideas on how we can progress the field. So AAIC as a whole then is the largest Alzheimer's and dementia scientific conference, and it's, as you saw there, got so many thousands of presentations, and it's over 4.5 days long. Now, we know that there are far more people who may be interested in the take-homes of AAIC, but not able to be, attending a 4.5-day conference, or may not have the background to be able to be diving into all of that research, but are still interested in what are the findings and what's the latest in Alzheimer's and dementia research. So with this audience in mind, then this year we've launched AAIC For All. So for AAIC For All, it's to give the key take-homes of AAIC for those people who wouldn't otherwise be attending the conference. So we have 2 tracks. One is for clinicians and for healthcare professionals, and the others is for members of the public. So this may include people who are living with the disease. It may include family members, it may include research participants, and really anybody else with an interest in Alzheimer's and dementia research. For both of these tracks, then AAIC For All takes place on the Thursday. So this is the final half day of the conference, and it's possible to attend either in person in Philadelphia or online. And for online attendance, you can tune in live on the day, be watching and be submitting questions, or you can be watching on demand. So you have up to 30 days to be watching the recording if it's at a time zone that doesn't suit. And both of these tracks for AAIC For All is completely free to attend and to sign up with. So today I'll tell you a little bit more about what will be happening during the community track, and then we'll have that overall background. If you have any questions, then please do open the Q&A button, and you can submit those, and then we'll be able to answer those as we go along, but mostly at the end. So a little bit more about AAIC For All, the track. So AAIC For All will be starting at 9 a.m. in Philadelphia time with a session of In the Neighborhood. So this is going to be highlighting local researchers. Then there's a short 15-minute break where there'll be refreshments available. And then there's a 90-minute session of AAIC highlights from the week. Then again, there's a short 15-minute break when then we'll move rooms, and then the whole conference of AAIC will be coming together for the final plenary session and the close of the conference. So during this final plenary session, then we'll have plenary presentations from Mike Weiner on the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, on their 2 decades of impact and what their path forward is. And then also from Risa Sperling on preclinical Alzheimer's disease. For the first In the Neighborhood session, this session spans from increasing our understanding of the biology to developing new technologies, and is where you can hear examples of Pennsylvania-based research on the global stage, and he'll also hear about ways to get involved. So this session will include presentations from Eddie Lee, who's a plenary speaker at AAIC on brain donation and the gift of knowledge, from Hussein Zalez, who will be speaking on the many spaces of Alzheimer's dementia, the subtypes and unique features. We'll be hearing from Dawn Mechanic-Hamilton, who is an association awardee, on cognitive testing, and then how we can improve cognitive testing through remote assessments as well. And then finally, we'll be hearing from Cerise Elliott of the NIA on building inclusive Alzheimer's and related dementias research studies. And then after these brief presentations, there'll be time for short Q&A with the presenters. And these presenters, were selected with input from our scientific program community, but importantly from representatives with lived experience of the disease. So then they've really been instrumental in helping shape this program. After the break, the next session is the highlights session. So here is where you can hear highlights and key takeaways from AAIC, directly from experts in the field. And, really important, you can be hearing what is giving our scientists hope. So for this session, then it will be chaired by Andrea Roca, who is an up-and-coming researcher based out of Brazil, and I will be co-chairing this session. It will begin with a reflection from Ralph Carmona, who has been a research participant and participated in some of the drug trials, and will be reflecting upon his experience and of research studies and their importance. And then we'll be hearing from, firstly, Visha van der Vleer, who's a professor in the Netherlands, who'll be talking about what's been shown with regards to risk reduction studies, what factors are important, and what have we been hearing at AAIC about those advancements. Then Jonathan Schott from the University College London in the UK will talk about what advances in diagnosis and treatment have we been hearing. Nancy Hodgson from the US will be talking on dementia care. And then Ozioma Okonkwo will be talking about health equity. And then finally, there's plenty of time at the end for panel Q&A, and it's possible to address questions from both the in-person audience and then also from virtual attendees watching will be able to submit their Q&A. So the aims of this session will be then to really be, looking at what's happened over the past 4.5 days, what latest findings have been debuted at AAIC, and then, what's their importance. So summarizing what they are and what the key take home is for members of the public. That all builds upon, what we know about Alzheimer's and dementia so far. So then it's the purpose of this webinar today is then to be providing you with that background, that landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia research, where then we'll be hearing further advances from at AAIC. So to give you that overview of the landscape, I would now hand over to Dr. Rebecca Edelmeyer, who will talk us through. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Claire. And I want to make sure that we can get my slides in presentation mode here so that everyone can see them. Hopefully you're seeing that correctly. And I'm really looking forward to giving you an update and an overview of some of the types of research that you will be seeing and hearing about at AAIC For All. It's such an exciting time for the field and there's so much going on. We wanted to make sure you had a little bit of a backgrounder to start your time as attendees as part of AAIC For All. So as part of our time today, what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of a background about sort of the field and really the differences between Alzheimer's and dementia. We want to cover some quick topics around understanding risk and addressing risk. We want to talk about early detection and diagnosis, as well as the treatment pipeline, and potentially how you can also get involved in research studies. So many of you may be familiar with some of the facts and figures associated with Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. The Alzheimer's Association puts out every year the facts and figures report. And some of these figures can be quite startling. We know that there are nearly 7 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's dementia in the United States. We know that's not even counting all individuals that are living with some other type of dementia or even mild cognitive impairment. And we know that there are also disparities in those who are affected by Alzheimer's disease. We know that older Black Americans are twice as likely to have Alzheimer's than or other dementia than whites. We also know that older Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely to have Alzheimer's or another dementia than whites. And we know that these diseases really together affect our society immensely, not only for the individuals living with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, but also their families. And this is where research comes into play. We need to continue to do a lot of discoveries to better understand the biological underpinnings and the reasons that drive Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And one of the reasons that we host AAIC every year is to really make sure that those discoveries can be talked about, and discussed, and we can learn from each other. So let's start with some basics though, in terms of one of the biggest questions I get asked is, what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And dementia we use really is an umbrella term that helps to describe changes in an individual's memory, their thinking, even their behaviors, even psychological symptoms that are potentially interfering with daily activities and daily life. So dementia really is a collection of symptoms that are related to cognitive and behavioral and psychological decline. But they're really driven by biological changes that are happening in the brain, which means they're driven by diseases. Alzheimer's disease happens to be the most common cause of the symptoms of dementia. But there are vascular types of changes that could occur. Vascular disease in the brain could cause symptoms of dementia. Lewy body disorders, frontotemporal neurodegeneration, and other types of diseases like Huntington's, Parkinson's that can cause the symptoms of dementia. Each one of these different diseases is defined by different biological changes that are happening in the brain that are driving those behaviors and those symptoms that an individual may be showing outwardly. Now, while Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, not everyone with cognitive decline has dementia. So this really stresses the importance of making sure that if anyone is experiencing any symptoms of change related to their memory, thinking, their behaviors, they really need to go to a doctor's office to make sure they're getting a thorough evaluation, because there are causes of cognitive decline that are not neurodegenerative diseases. And that means that there may be some changes that could be reversible. There could be reasons like sleep disturbances, side effects from medications, metabolic disorders, other types of toxicities that could be causing cognitive decline. And it's really important to understand the biological underpinnings of what's driving those changes. And this is what brings us to understanding even what are those biological changes? How are researchers understanding these different diseases? I want to focus on Alzheimer's today because it is, again, the most common cause of the changes that are experienced with dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is defined by a number of biological changes. These are just a few. The hallmark changes that you hear most about are probably the beta amyloid plaques and the tau tangles in the brain. These are changes that are happening around the neurons and inside the neurons, and these are particular proteins that are becoming dysfunctional in the brain. We all have beta amyloid in our brain and tau, but at some point the disease creates them, or the disease causes them to become dysfunctional and disruptive, and they're deteriorating the cell health in the brain, both of the neurons and even the glial cells, or those immune cells that help to keep the brain in working efficiently. And so what happens is the cells that are affected by some of these changes will die in areas of the brain that are really important for our memory, our thinking, our behaviors, our personalities. And with individuals that have advanced Alzheimer's disease, you'll actually see shrinkage of that brain tissue. And there's a lot of research to suggest that we need to better understand why these changes are happening. Also, other changes like inflammation, changes to the blood vessels, the immune cells themselves, all of these things are happening in the brain of Alzheimer's disease, and many different changes similarly in other different diseases that cause dementia. We need to truly understand what those underpinnings are so that we can better target them with treatments and better diagnose people at earlier stages. That brings me to discuss really what is the continuum of these types of neurodegenerative diseases. Again, Alzheimer's disease is a continuum itself. It occurs across time. And for each individual, the changes that are experienced and the symptoms that are experienced with Alzheimer's disease change over time at different rates, at different speeds for each individual, but there's sort of a general progression that exists. We know that Alzheimer's disease actually begins in what we call an asymptomatic stage. We also sometimes call this the preclinical stage, meaning before somebody has symptoms, but there may be biological changes that are already occurring in the brain, sometimes up to 10 or 20 years before symptoms even are noticeable or start. And then there's a stage called mild cognitive impairment. You will hear this called MCI when you're attending AAIC For All many times. And MCI is really due to changes, again, that are happening in the brain, in this case, due to Alzheimer's disease. So someone may have the buildup of the amyloid plaques and even tau tangles and even some brain shrinkage, but they're also testing objectively worse on some of these cognitive tests that can be completed in a doctor's office. And you're starting to see the early stages of memory loss or other cognitive changes that are occurring. Now, not everyone that develops MCI will go on to develop stages of dementia. Now, I also want to remind you that you could replace this graphic for frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia. Many of these different types of diseases will go through these various phases. And individuals that progress from MCI due to Alzheimer's disease will then potentially progress to something called dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And that's stages of the disease then broken out into mild, moderate, and severe, where symptoms will become more and more, they will be interfering with some activities of daily living until an individual loses a lot of independence over time, where their symptoms are interfering with most activities of daily living. And it's important to understand that, again, these diseases occur across a continuum, but while we're doing the research to better understand the disease itself and how it progresses, We also are developing treatments that may work at different stages of the disease process and for different individuals. So we need to also understand a little bit about risk and what are we doing to address risk factors in individuals across every group, every population, every country across the world. And so you may see a lot of research presented at AAIC that's talking about risk. What do we understand about it? How do we define what risk is for each individual and each group? And then how do we develop sustainable strategies to really reduce risk across all populations? So there's many different things that may impact risk for cognitive decline, or even for someone to develop dementia. There's a constellation of reasons that may be both fundamental and unique to everyone. And our overall risk is really made up of both what we call non-modifiable risk factors, things like our age, we can't change our age, or things like genetics, and then modifiable risk factors. Those are things that potentially we have the ability to adapt or adopt, things that could reduce our risk in terms of modifying that risk over time. So these are things like our physical activity across our life course, education across a life course, even our nutrition, our diet, how we sleep, environmental or other lifestyle factors, and even our cardiovascular health. All of these factors, both modifiable and non-modifiable factors, help to define our overall risk. And we know that also social determinants of health may impact some or all of these factors, depending on you as an individual or you as a population or group of individuals living in a particular environment. The strength of our understanding around risk is still continuing to grow over time, and there's an immense amount of research happening in this space, and we're continuing to learn more and more over time. And we need to continue to study risk from all angles, because what might be a risk factor for one individual may not be a risk factor for another. And so we need to continue to do the research in an inclusive way that really helps to understand risk across all populations. But as we continue to learn more, we are understanding that risk is something that we potentially can address today. And a lot of the evidence would suggest that there are positive and everyday actions that people can be doing every day that can make a difference on their brain health, and even lowering the risk for cognitive decline and possibly Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Research that's been presented at AAIC and research that continues to be in development has been suggesting that potentially up to 40% of dementia cases could be prevented or delayed by targeting some of these modifiable risk factors. So the Alzheimer's Association does have something called 10 Healthy Habits for Your Brain. This is based on the evidence that is existing today. And these are different types of healthy habits that we're encouraging people to try to incorporate across our life course. We don't have the perfect recipe for risk reduction today, but you'll hear more and more at AAIC some of those different types of research studies that are actually testing many of these different interventions, and many times combining multiple healthy factors together as part of a risk reduction intervention to see what's going to be the most impactful for our brains. As we continue to think about what is happening in the brain, how do we define these different diseases and who is at risk, we need to start having discussions about how do we detect and diagnose disease at its earliest stages in the doctor's office. And we really need to improve upon this, because we know that many individuals are not getting an accurate and early diagnosis. And there's a lot of benefits to an early and accurate diagnosis. We know that there are medical benefits, emotional and social benefits, as well as financial benefits for individuals and their families. Especially when it comes to medical benefits, we know that an individual getting medical benefits where they're accessing current treatments, an opportunity to participate in clinical trials, and certainly a chance to prioritize their health and be a part of making healthcare decisions is something that we want in every individual to have an opportunity for. And we know that it's important to be planning with families, making sure that you're having that time early on in the disease process to do this. And at AAIC, you'll see a lot of different research that's really trying to study how we detect and diagnose the disease at its earliest stages. What can we do to define who's at risk, even in our health systems? And how do we make sure that they're getting put on an appropriate treatment and care path and navigated through the systems in the easiest way possible to help families? I do want to talk a little bit about how Alzheimer's disease is currently diagnosed. We know that there's no single test today that can determine if a person living with Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia um, it can be done. So that we know that doctors really today use a combination of diagnostic tools combined with medical history to make an accurate diagnosis. So there's a variety of neurological exams and functional and cognitive testing that can be administered. There's physical exams that are completed to make sure you're not only potentially ruling in causes of your cognitive decline, but also ruling out those causes. And there's a lot of work that's being done to develop what we call biomarkers. These are different types of tools that allow for researchers and clinicians to be able to get a better understanding of the changes that are happening in your brain. And these include things like imaging and even fluid analysis. But as I noted, there's not one single test that determines this. And a lot of the research that is presented at AAIC is very focused on developing not only better tools, sometimes even digital and cognitive tests that can be done using artificial intelligence or different types of technologies to better understand the changes that are happening in the brain, but also some of these different types of biomarker testing, where we try to understand these biological changes that are happening in the brain. And biomarkers are something that sometimes people are like, what is a biomarker? But you all are very, very familiar with these. These are very reliable predictors and indicators of disease and disease progression. For example, you've probably had some blood testing done when you go to your doctor's office to look at your glucose levels, which could be potentially a biomarker for insulin resistance and diabetes, or you've had your cholesterol tested to look at your cholesterol as a biomarker for heart disease. And when you even look at some of these types of fluid analyses, you know that these types of tests are not necessarily just single tests. The doctors are using a variety of markers combined in a unique way to better understand or predict your risk for disease or understand the changes that are happening in your body. So we need those types of tools for Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia as well. We need them to help in aiding in the diagnosis. We need these types of tools to actually help understand whether people are able to be eligible or could be enrolled in clinical trials. We can use biomarkers to help determine the course of an illness, and we need them to also understand and track outcomes, both the safety and effectiveness of new treatments in individuals. So biomarkers in development for Alzheimer's disease and other dementia have been really happening over the course of many, many years. We know when Alzheimer's disease was first identified in 1906, that was by Dr. Alois Alzheimer. He was looking under a microscope at tissue in the brain, developing a better understanding of those amyloid plaques, as we talked about, and the tau tangles. And you could actually see the disease pathology in the brain under that microscope. But we need more and more ways to better understand those changes that are happening in individuals that are living with the disease. We can't wait to take the tissue out of the brain to look at it under a microscope. So when we first started seeing some real breakthroughs in this research, probably in the late 1990s, we started seeing researchers looking at what we call cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, looking at some of the markers like the amyloid beta proteins, the tau markers, and the phosphorylated tau markers in the brain could actually be viewed in that clear fluid that bathes your spinal cord and brain, and that's extracted through a lumbar puncture. And these types of tests then led to advancements in brain imaging. In the mid 2000s, we saw advancements in amyloid PET imaging. This is a way we could actually look at those amyloid plaques through images of the brain in an individual that is living. We saw advances in tau PET imaging as well in the mid to late 2010s. And we now have FDA approved biomarker tests for cerebral spinal fluid, amyloid PET imaging, and tau PET imaging that can be used to aid in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, looking at some of those key hallmark changes. And we're now in a new era where we're starting to see the use of blood or plasma to look at some of the amyloid beta, the tau markers that are coursing through the blood to help better understand whether or not there's changes in the brain. So as I noted, again, there's not one single test that's going to necessarily diagnose Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia alone. There are a number of tests that are going to be used, combined together to help the doctor understand the confidence in delivering that diagnosis and really truly understanding what might be going on in the brain to cause those symptoms. We're even seeing other types of emerging technologies developing. We're seeing tests that are, a lot of this again presented at AAIC. So more tests that are being developed to maybe even use the eye as a biomarker, or be able to use the skin or even saliva as other types of tools and technologies that could help to aid in diagnosis. The goal here really is that we continue to develop tools and technologies that are going to be accessible, something that's low cost, something that's not invasive, and something that can be really, really valuable for doctors and patients as they're moving through and navigating through the healthcare system to make sure that they're getting an early diagnosis. And this is really helping us to really change how we do the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. We used to only diagnose people at a very advanced stage of aging, once they already had the symptoms of dementia. If you remember that disease continuum time course I showed you, and that was using medical history, maybe family history, and changes in their cognition. But with the use of biomarkers and technologies, we are changing the game here and better being able to understand, even in individuals who may be cognitively unimpaired, whether those changes are already occurring in the brain. We're actually testing people in clinical trials today in what we call the preclinical or asymptomatic stages of disease, so that we can really use that window as a way for us to better detect, diagnose, and even test new therapies in individuals at the earliest stages. So why is early detection so important? I think before I leave you today, I want you to understand a little bit more about the treatment landscape, and something that you will experience at AAIC For All, some presentations on some of the work that will have been presented around the different types of treatments. Now, treatments could potentially be both drug treatments, but also what we might call lifestyle interventions and non-drug treatments. So there are a variety of approaches that are being tested today. I'll share with you the FDA-approved therapies for Alzheimer's disease. Now, as we talked about, in 1906, it was when the disease was first identified, but it wasn't until 1996 that we had our first FDA-approved therapies for Alzheimer's dementia. And these were treatments that really go after helping to enhance cognition and function in an individual. They treat the symptoms. You've probably heard of some of these treatments, Aricept, Razidine, Exelon, Namenda. These treatments are approved to treat individuals with mild dementia to severe dementia. But these treatments don't necessarily change or slow down the disease progression. They can temporarily help to increase the efficiency that cells can talk to each other in the brain, but they don't necessarily slow down that disease process. So that's why it's really important that we continue to do the research to develop the therapies that slow down those disease changes that are happening in the brain. And you can see in the purple that we've had a few treatments that were approved in 2021 and 2023, and now 2024, that slow down the disease progression. These are a new type of therapies that you've probably heard of. They go after some of that underlying biology. They go after the beta amyloid plaques and in the brain. And they go after the beta amyloid. They help the brain to remove that amyloid from the brain, and that we know is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And these treatments are approved for individuals in the mild cognitive impairment to mild dementia stage of Alzheimer's. And I hope you can also see here in the blue, we have other treatments that have been recently approved to treat some of the behaviors or neuropsychiatric features associated with Alzheimer's disease. Servexerant is a treatment that's actually been approved to treat insomnia, but it has been shown in clinical trials to be effective and safe in individuals who do have Alzheimer's disease. And brexpiprazole or Rexulti is another treatment that's actually been approved to treat agitation, a very challenging symptom associated with Alzheimer's disease. We need a variety of treatments that are going to be approved all across the disease continuum, not only for Alzheimer's disease, but all types of dementia. And you will see at AAIC that there are a variety of different studies that are going to be presented. Again, not only developing treatments for Alzheimer's, but also frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementias, vascular disease, and even other types of dementia. And so that research will continue. And we know that today, even when you just look at the Alzheimer's disease drug development pipeline, there are over 127 unique therapies that are being tested in 164, at least 164 clinical trials. There are so many different treatments that are under investigation today. Many of them are treatments that we would call ones that slow down the disease process, like disease modification approaches. We have ones that are like our Aricept or Namenda that are really helping to enhance cognition. And we have other treatments that are aimed at the behavioral and neuropsychiatric symptoms. Many of the treatments that are in the pipeline today are really targeting novel disease processes, ones that you haven't even heard of yet, ones that go after the inflammation in the brain or the immune cells in the brain. And to really we believe it's going to be a combination of these different types of treatments together that's going to be most effective in treating Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. One thing I do want to note to you is that even just for these Alzheimer's disease trials, this isn't even counting the trials that are underway for frontotemporal dementia or Lewy body dementia. These trials require over 65,000 participants, research volunteers, to help us make progress. And that's an immense amount of people. It's important that people continue to recognize that the people who participate in these clinical studies really are the heroes of our work. And they are the ones that allow us to make progress in research and allow us to make progress in treatment. And for those of you that are listening today, and for those of you that might be motivated to participate in research, I do want to encourage you to think about looking for clinical studies that might be a fit for you. The Alzheimer's Association actually provides something called Trial Match. It is a clinical trials matching service. It's free to you, and it can help you to look at a customized list of potential studies, maybe based on your location or different type of dementia that you are interested in participating in, research studies for that of that nature. There's all different types of studies, those for Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, frontotemporal disease, Lewy body dementia, other types of dementia, mild cognitive impairment. There's trials that are focused on nutrition, exercise, trials that are focused on developing new blood tests, trials that are focused on care. You could even be a caregiver participating in a research study. So we're looking for healthy as well as cognitively impaired individuals from all backgrounds to participate. And so I wanted to make sure I shared with you today the opportunity to use Trial Match as a way to look for clinical studies. We have over 800 studies that might be a right fit for you across the world that you might be able to be interested in participating in. So I'm going to just wrap up by saying I hope I was able to show you a little bit about what you might experience, the types of research kind of categories that you'll be seeing presented at AAIC For All when you participate on August 1st. And just an example for you again of Alzheimer's disease and where we're going. We're trying to understand that underlying biology. We're trying to understand what those brain changes are so that we can better understand the biomarkers that define them, better detect and diagnose the disease at its earliest stages. And then how do we develop those treatments for those different aspects of these diseases? They're complex. And as I noted, it's unlikely that there's going to be one single therapy that's going to be most effective for these types of diseases of neurodegeneration. You're likely to see Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, treated like you see cancer and cardiovascular disease treated today. It's going to be a powerful combination of effective therapeutics. We have treatments today that have been approved by the FDA to go after those beta amyloid plaques, but you can see that we still have more work to do in terms of targeting all aspects of this complex biology. And I don't want you to forget about risk factor interventions. This layered onto an individual's treatment and care is going to be something that's going to be important for all of us when we think about risk factor interventions across our life course. It's going to be a powerful combination of effective treatments as well as sustainable risk reduction strategies that's going to help us fight Alzheimer's and all other types of dementia. So I hope today that you've been able to get a summary of all of the work that we hope that you'll see presented at AAIC For All. It's a very exciting time in research for Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'll leave you with just one last slide here, a couple resources for you to find out more information about the research that's happening in the field. And certainly we know you're going to hear more at AAIC For All. And thanks so much for listening. I'll turn it back to Claire.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we had a comment through it in the Q&A during that time, just saying what an amazing and complete presentation. Thank you to Rebecca for this talk. So thank you for that talk. And next, we will pass to Sarah. So I will just bring your slides up for you, Sarah, who will then be able to be telling us some tips for attending a scientific conference. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Claire. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone from the West Coast. It's wonderful to be here. I just want to thank the Alzheimer's Association for putting this together. I'm Sarah Walter. I work at the University of Southern California, and it's just been a pleasure to be part of this program with the Alzheimer's Association. We started inviting our research participants who were partnering with us. They were bringing their expertise of living with the disease, being involved in research studies, caring for folks with Alzheimer's disease, bringing that expertise to us and helping us improve research. So Claire, I'm not able to see my slides yet, but I'm happy to ad lib. Okay, I'll just keep talking. Okay, it looks like I might have dropped the connection, so I'll just keep talking and hopefully it'll...
Yeah, we can still hear
Great.
you.
You can hear me?
We can hear you. So we've got
Thank you.
your slide up at the moment with about the Thursday AAIC For All sessions.
Okay, great. So our partners in research have been just incredible, and they started coming to AAIC in small groups. In 2020, the conference was virtual, and so we had about 20 people join us virtually. They really enjoyed listening to scientists, hearing firsthand what is going on in research and being able to hear just the depth and the breadth of the science that's being done. Some of our care partners told us how it gave them hope really for the future to see all this beautiful work that was being done and how hard scientists were working. So we just brought together some of the tips that they provided to us after attending this conference, either virtually or in person. You can see on the photo our wonderful group that joined us in Amsterdam last year. So I just sharing those tips and tricks with you today. I think the first and most important is really just remember that you're going to be able to review these sessions online. Everything will be recorded, including this wonderful presentation that Dr. Edelmeyer gave us today. I think, Rebecca, that was so rich, and I feel like I want to watch it again myself. So just remember, everything's recorded. So if something comes up and you're not able to join in person, you can always watch the recordings later. And we've heard from folks that they really appreciated being able even to watch a session a second time, especially if there was something they didn't quite catch or they weren't able to note down. We really recommend that you just be a sponge, listen to the questions. So not just not just what the speakers say, but what is the audience asking and how are the speakers responding? Take your notes, and you may have a chance to ask your question later to your own doctor or through other resources to get answers to those questions. And you can also talk to other folks with lived experience. What did they get out of the session? And, you know, different people pick up different gems. We did hear from some of our participants that joined the conference in person that, you know, some of these talks are very technical. And if you feel lost, just hang on. Usually the researchers bring everything together at the end. They summarize.
Yeah, I think we've lost Sarah's audio. Sarah, can you hear us?
Sarah, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Where did we leave off?
We were at the some talks can get very technical. So hang on to the conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang on to the conclusion. And then we can go to the next slide. For in-person tips, our participants shared that they really recommend, if you're comfortable doing so, wear a button or a t-shirt or even a hat that helps identify that you're a person with lived experience, that you're an advocate, or that you represent a community or a nonprofit. This can help open up those conversations for researchers. You will find if you self-identify as a person that has lived experience, researchers will come up to you and ask you questions, maybe more questions than you have for them. And if you're coming in person, definitely wear comfortable shoes and clothes, dress in layers. Sometimes these conference halls are really big. Sometimes the air conditioning's on just a little too high. So it's good to have those layers. Check for where the bathrooms are so that you know where those are. And I love that the session has built in lots of breaks for snacks and water. And then, you know, I just want to say on behalf of researchers, we really love hearing your perspective. We want to hear your questions. We want to understand where the researchers got too technical and where you need clarification, or where you want us to get a little more specific and not be too general. So we need that feedback. So please do ask questions if you have them. And I see we've got a few coming in through the Q&A today. So, and then, you know, sometimes folks can be tempted to really tell their whole story, and it's tough to do that. So especially if you're at the microphone in the big room, try to keep it brief and just ask questions around where you need more clarification. So those were the tips that were shared by our research participants. You can see a picture here from one of our conferences that we attended together as a group. I just want to thank them for all of their help and for helping provide these tips. And we'll have about 12 people from our advisory board from the Alzheimer's Clinical Trials Consortium joining us in Philadelphia. And we really look forward to meeting you in person if you will be there, or seeing you online. Claire, should I turn it back to you?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for those tips and for your continued support of AAIC and AAIC For All. It's always a joy to be partnering with you, and your representatives have really been integral to shaping this program. We're so grateful for this partnership. So that ends our presentation. So we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. If you have any, just a couple to respond to is that this presentation is being recorded, and we'll be making the recording available on our website. Also, registration does remain open. So if you enjoyed this and wanted to tell other people about AAIC For All, registration is open. It's free of charge. So please do help spread the word, and people can register at als.org/AAIC for all. So I think that was most of the questions that were being coming in. There was just one, I think, for you, Rebecca, which is then from an individual watching who's a community health worker who goes to give outreach around early diagnosis. And that there's questions such as what would be the consequence of getting diagnosed through the asymptomatic stage, because we don't have the drug treatments for that stage yet. So would you be able to kind of comment briefly on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think right now, the individuals that are getting a diagnosis potentially at an asymptomatic stage are typically people that are participating in clinical trials. As you noted in the question, right now, there are not people, there are no FDA approved treatments to treat Alzheimer's disease in asymptomatic stages of the disease, but there are a number of clinical trials ongoing that are actually testing some of even those new FDA approved treatments at the earlier stages. So many individuals that are getting a diagnosis at I would say the asymptomatic stage are really in clinical trial settings. It's unlikely that an individual today would get a diagnosis of asymptomatic Alzheimer's disease in their doctor's office outside of clinical trials. So again, partially because of the appropriate use criteria and recommendations for even the types of tests like the cerebrospinal fluid analysis, the PET imaging, much of that should not be used in individuals that do not yet have symptoms. by doctors, so they might not even be able to get it covered for that type of testing in a typical doctor's office outside of the context of studies. So I don't know if that helps. I don't know if Sarah, if you want to add in too, because I know you work quite a bit in a clinical trial setting with your team. So there might be some additional information you want to share.
I can just say that, we're testing these drugs that have just been approved for people that have symptoms that are actually experiencing changes to their cognition. These drugs that have been approved, they're also being tested in people that don't have any cognitive changes. And once those studies are complete, we'll understand, is it safe and does it work? Does it delay the development of cognitive problems? So, at this point, if you have amyloid in your brain, or you've had a blood test that told you have amyloid in your brain, but you haven't, you're not enrolled in a study, at this point, you can't access those drugs. You can do all these other things that Rebecca mentioned, to address prevention. Sleep is so important, exercise and good diet. Those are all things that I'm doing now in my 40s because I want to have a healthy older age. I see there's a few questions about prevention, and we know that's a big question that all of us have, especially if you've had loved ones, grandparents, or parents with this disease. And I'm excited too that AAIC For All includes a talk from Risa Sperling, who is one of the leading scientists on preclinical Alzheimer's disease, or early Alzheimer's disease, where people don't have any changes in their memory and thinking. And that's one of the talks that will be on Thursday, August 1st. And she's going to talk about prevention as well as part of that talk.
Yes, so yeah, that talk by Risa will be, the key one. Risa is a wonderful presenter, a wonderful storyteller. So recommend staying to the end of the AAIC For All track to hear that. We also had another question for Rebecca, then saying, will the most recently FDA approved drug actually remove amyloid beyond Leqembi? And if so, will infusions stop?
It will remove amyloid beyond so there are 3 FDA approved medications that aducanumab, lecanemab, or Leqembi is noted, and donanemab, now known as Kisunla. And those treatments all are very effective at removing beta amyloid from the brain. And each of those treatments removes the beta amyloid in a slightly different way. So while they may be in the same class of treatments, they each go after the beta amyloid in a slightly different way. So the newest treatment really targets the plaques alone. And once the plaques are removed, it is potentially possible that a patient would be stopped on those treatments. Because if the plaque is removed, there's nothing else for the treatment to target anymore in the brain. But a lot of this is still under discussion. A lot of more research still needs to be completed, but they would need evidence that the plaque is removed before stopping. So that would be through an amyloid PET scan to be able to cease taking the treatment over time. Now, I'll say Leqembi is a different way of going after the beta amyloid in the brain. It is our understanding today that an individual taking Leqembi, they would not necessarily stop treatment because it can go not only after some of the aggregated forms of beta amyloid, but also some of the smaller pieces of beta amyloid in the brain. So a person that starts on Leqembi would continue to take that treatment over time. However, that being said, the FDA is already reviewing Leqembi, what they call maintenance dosing, and other types of dosing regimens for that treatment. So maybe once the amyloid plaque is removed from the brain after a certain amount of time, maybe it's a year, 18 months, a patient would be switched to what they call a maintenance dosing regimen, or maybe a lower dose. So maybe less frequently or a lower dose of treatment over time. So all of that is being reviewed by the FDA right now, and all of the research continues, because the goal is that these are just the first. These are the first generation of these medications, and there's a lot we still have to learn. I think, as Sarah noted, we're already testing them. They've already been approved to treat people in that have symptoms in the early stages of the disease. They're now being tested in individuals who do not yet have symptoms. So there's a lot more we still need to do. But I think over the next few years, you'll see a better understanding from the clinical trials on how these treatments should be delivered and when they could potentially be stopped or switched to a maintenance treatment dosing regimen.
Thank you. And there was another question that came in about treatments, then just about the GLP-1 ones. Is that something that you'd be able to comment on? And we're getting short of time, so
I'll be short. I know Claire knows I like to talk. Okay, so the GLP-1 is a new treatment that's being tested today for Alzheimer's disease and potentially other types of dementia. GLP-1 is a treatment that goes after sort of a mechanism in the brain that we think helps to contribute to inflammation and also how cells use energy, glucose. The GLP-1 antagonists are medications that are already approved for treatment today. You've seen them being used now to treat type 2 diabetes and even for weight loss. But this is an example of a medication that's being tested now in Alzheimer's disease, where they do believe that maybe some of the way the disease process occurs, we know that cells become less efficient at using their energy. So are we able to increase that efficiency and utilization of glucose of the cells? And that's a goal of those types of treatments. So we are going to hear more at AAIC, from what I understand, around the GLP-1 approaches. And we know that in a few years, we'll also see more large-scale clinical trials reading out from these types of approaches. So there's a number of different treatments that are being tested in Alzheimer's disease today that target GLP-1 as a mechanism.
And final question is then from an educator in Native American communities. And they say the main question that they get is the percentage for Native Americans affected with Alzheimer's.
That's a great question. And so we're still continuing to do research across a variety of populations to truly understand across special populations, whether they be of different races, ethnicities, living in different social economics situations. We need to understand who's most at risk and why they're at risk. We know that based on a few studies that the prevalence of cognitive impairment in approximately 54% in American Indians exists that are aged 70 to 95 years old. We know that about 35% of them are living with mild cognitive impairment and about 10% in stages of dementia. We also know that this population is living with significant impacts from cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to still learn about why the Native American and American Indian populations are disproportionately also affected by Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. We have to do a lot of learning. We need to understand what's going on really in these populations. We need to create culturally sensitive screening tests and different types of tools and technologies that also work for this population. So there's a lot more to still learn, in particular for Native Americans and American Indians and Alaskan Native Indians as well in our country.
Thank you for that. And thank you for all your questions. I'm so sorry we didn't have time to get through it all. But then wanted just to highlight that, yeah, at AAIC For All, we'll be covering some of the take-homes from the conference. It won't be that we'll be able to be covering every single advancement because, you know, we've got 4.5 days where there's 10 parallel sessions happening at once. There's 4,500 posters. We're not able to be covering everything. So I'll hope that you'll be able to understand it, that you'd still be able to enjoy getting those, you know, few key highlights and take-homes and advances that we're seeing. Any last words from Rebecca, from Sarah before we go?
I'm just so excited that you're all coming. I think it's a really extraordinary time to be participating in something like AAIC For All. And from a perspective of a researcher, I really am glad that you're going to be there to see it and experiencing it.
For sharing your feedback with us as well, because we really want to make this accessible for everyone and we want you to get the most out of it. So thank you. Appreciate you.
Yes, please do it's our first year. Send us your feedback on this webinar, on the program as a whole, and we are super excited to be seeing you all on August the 1st, and so grateful for your presence there and to be bringing the entire Alzheimer's and dementia research community together. So we will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye.